日本スナップス
モビルスーツクラスチェック自慢の艦隊で対戦ユニットを奪え取って取られて熱くなれ SD ガンダムジェネレーションセットでお得。
Hi everybody, in today's video I'm going to talk about the Sufami Turbo, which is an add-on for the Super Famicom, the Japanese Super NES, and you probably never heard about it, and that's because it only came out in Japan in June 28th of 1996. So that's very late in the lifespan of the console. At the time, the Sony PlayStation, the Sega Saturn, and even the Nintendo 64 were already out in Japan. So what does the Sufami Turbo do? You just plug it onto the console, add 1 or 2 games, and then you just play. So why have the Sufami Turbo and not just individual cartridges? So there are 2 reasons for that. The first one is that, as you can see, you could plug 2 games, and basically game A would use some of the features of game B. So here I have some of the strategy games from Gundam, and so game A would be able to use some of the characters of game B, so that would basically be an extension of that game. Or the games had the feature to save, to use the save of game B, so you could copy what's inside of game B and put it into game 1. So if you were really jealous of your friend, you could put his cartridge on slot B and steal his data, or you could put your crappy data on slot B and copy it onto his cartridge, and then you would have lost a friend. There's another reason for having that kind of extension, and is to save cost. For the younger of you who probably don't understand the price of chips, you have to understand that games at the time were expensive for a reason. For example, Doom, which came out in '96 on the Super NES, cost 12,800 yen in Japan, so adjusted for inflation, that's $120. The most expensive game that year was a game for Go, a Go game, and it was 14,800 yen, $138 adjusted for inflation, so that's a lot of money. Even a more normal game like Super Mario RPG was 7,500 yen, so that's $70. For comparison, a game, a standard game on the Sufami Turbo was 3,980 yen, so all the games would cost that much. That's $37, and if you bought a game plus the Sufami Turbo, that would cost you 6,800 yen, so that's about $62. So what does it get cheaper? In order to understand the costs of chips, we will look a little bit at the inside of some cartridges. So here you have a game from Bandai, another Gundam game, and as you can see, very simple design. Only has 2 chips, and you need 2 chips in order to start a Super NES game. The first chip here is very famous. It's a lockout chip, so it's very similar to the 10 NES chip. This one has 2 names. It's either called the CIC or F411B. And yeah, that's, as I said, a lockout chip used in order to avoid piracy. So it would communicate to the console, and if you didn't have that chip, the game would not start. And here basically you have the ROM, so the memory, the game itself is stored onto that that chip. So in all the games that we're going to see today, there's only 1 ROM chip, but on some games, a lot of the Final Fantasy games had 2 ROM chips because those were bigger games, and very few games had 3 ROM chips in them. So that's your very basic design, 2 chips. Let's jump ahead a little bit and go on to Yoshi's Island, a game that came out in '95. And here, as you can see, we have a bigger motherboard and more chips. So same as before, we have the Nintendo chips. This one is a little bit different. we have the ROM chip, and here in the middle a very important chip that is called the Nintendo FX. So Nintendo had all kinds of different chips. If you're interested, I can do a video about those. These chips were made, those were enhancement chips, so to make the Super NES faster and to enable it to process more information. That chip, the Super FX chip, is famous because it was in a lot of commercials.
Destruction. Carnage. Oh, you didn't use your turn signal, son. I'm gonna have to write you up for that last one.
Stunt Race FX with the Super FX chip for multi-dimensional visual weirdnicity, only on the Super NES.
And it was in Doom, for example, and also Star Fox is also a game that had this chip. Here you have a chip that allows the system to switch bank data. So I'm not a specialist about that chip, but basically what it does, the ROM had too much information for the console to access everything at once, so it would switch between different parts of the memory and tell basically the console what it should load inside of the console. And here at the top part you have a battery, voltage regulation chip, and the RAM chip. At the time, if you wanted to save on a cartridge, you didn't have a lot of solutions. That was for the longest time the only solution that you had was to have a RAM chip, so very expensive chip at the time, a battery, because as you know, RAM needs electricity, it needs to be powered all the time to not lose the saved information. This is why your Pokemon cartridges will lose their save data after 15 to 20 years. And here the voltage regulator makes so that the RAM does not get fried, so that too much tension doesn't go into the RAM chip. So as you can see, that's a lot of chips, and the Sufami Turbo actually enabled to save some of those. So let's open this and see a little bit what's inside of it. So here you have the ROM chip, so it contains the BIOS of the system. Not a lot to say about that. Here is the Nintendo chip, so you don't need to have that chip inside of one of your games, and I think that's one of the missed opportunity of that system. I think it would have been a great system for pirates and illegal users, because you did not need to have another Nintendo chip, you already had one here. To my knowledge, it wasn't used a lot by pirates and bootleggers, so yeah, here you go. Here you have, I didn't find a lot of information about this chip. It's called 74AC139. So it's a decoder demultiplexer. So as far as I understood, I think this chip handles the communication between the two games and the console itself. So you would have two streams of information coming from cartridge A and cartridge B, and basically what this chip would do, it would put this information together into one. And here, this chip in the middle, we've already seen that one. That one is the voltage chip. So it's the chip that we had before between the battery and the RAM that would give the right amount of energy to the RAM. So now let's take a quick look, not that one, let's take a quick look at the inside of a cartridge. So here you see it will plug, I mean actually it's the opposite, it would plug like that. So you have the battery on the other side, very peculiar. I don't think there's any other SNES cartridges that had that design where the battery was on the back. And if you look here, you only have two chips. You have this one is the ROM and this one is the RAM. You don't need the Nintendo chip and you don't need the voltage regulation chip. So here, that's a lot of money that Bandai was able to save on every cartridge, not having those two chips. Unfortunately, this system was not very popular. It only had 13 games, and in the second video we're going to take a look at all of these games, and we're going to discuss why this console failed, because unfortunately it did fail. It was not very popular in Japan. Thank you, see you next time.